because I got to reiterate too, I am this person who's very skeptical of everything, and I have this
Sure.
belief: you live, you suffer, and you die. And now I'm in a room with a bunch of people taking ayahuasca and a shaman.
For me, it's like getting addicted to getting a root canal. It's necessary, but it's not something you want to do all the time.
That's a really good analogy, honestly.
I thought something went wrong. Something happened to the machine. Lights start flashing, or the doctor runs in. I thought I died. Today, I am joined by my friend Ruger Aber. Ruger, how are you today?
Doing well. How are you?
So good. So good. Ruger, I wanted to talk to you today for many reasons, one of which is your story is super relatable to so many people. If it's not relatable to, people individually, I know for a fact that we all have a family member, a friend, a child, a parent who has been through so many of the things that you've been through. And so I want to talk about it. And as you share your story, I'd kind of like to weave in my own experience a little bit, if that works for you.
Sure.
Cool. So before we get into this, I have to give a disclaimer to everyone watching and listening. We're not doctors. We're not giving medical advice. We're not therapists. My medical education ended in 12th grade when I took anatomy and physiology. And not to brag, but I think I got a B plus. And that's where we're at. So we're just sharing our personal experiences and what's worked for us. And Ruger, you found yourself at a point in your life where you were struggling with some different things and looking for a way out. Is that right?
That's right. So currently I am running an ayahuasca retreat in Mexico, and that is something that I never in my wildest dreams thought I'd ever be doing.
Right.
And so the very first time I did ayahuasca is something that is instrumental in my life and is one of the reasons why I'm here.
So how did you first get introduced to ayahuasca?
So mine was an accident. I fell into it. Some people say they have a calling, which is pretty common, but really mine came from a place of basically desperation in life.
Right. Right. So how did you come across it?
The shorter version is I basically dealt with depression and anxiety and this kind of nihilistic view of life my entire life.
Right.
It started with growing up in a very, very religious house, and then kind of not really believing that. And I got to the point where I was basically, atheist. I just didn't have any belief in really anything.
Right.
And it was basically this mentality of life that you live, you suffer, and you die, and that's it.
Right.
And that's kind of how I have a picture of myself in my picture that looks like that. It's like if you saw the picture, it's like, yeah, that guy probably believes that. And
oh wow.
that's kind of what my life was. It was representative of that issue. So I was basically seeing a therapist, and at some point the therapist is basically like, you're not making very much progress, and she'd seen me over the course of a while.
Right.
And then I went in there one day and she said, I've never done this myself, but I've had clients who've had, and it's been very successful. And she basically gives me a card with a phone number, and she says it's ayahuasca.
So the therapist in the US, right? The therapist in the US hands you a card and says, I've done all I can do. Call this number.
More or less. I mean, it wasn't I've done all I can do, but she's just like, kind of like, I don't know what to do with
you. Right. So how long did it take for you to call this number?
Well, first of all, when she gave me that card, I would have taken it in her office that day. Like I would have done it then. Just because I didn't know that much about it, but it's something that offered a chance or hope. So if there would have been a cup of ayahuasca, I would have done it right then. But I wanted to make sure it was like legitimate with the right people. It wasn't a situation like a horror movie where I'm going to get my kidney stolen. So but I called the number like the next day.
And you still have your kidneys.
Yes.
Okay. I just want to, before we proceed, I just want to check. So you called the number the next day, and how did that phone call go?
So it was actually a little bit interesting because it's kind of kept underground in the United States. Initially, they're kind of like, "Who are you?"
Right.
Mentioned ceremony, and then they're like, "Okay, okay," and so they sent me an email that had the recommended diet and things you're supposed to abstain from before doing it.
Right.
And then on the bottom of that email had another phone number.
Okay.
So I called that phone number, and it was actually another person answered, and they said, "Yeah, I used to be a nutrition coach. It happened to be a nutrition coach at the same place I worked at."
Whoa.
And then she's like, "Yeah, I wrote the diet, and I'm actually going this weekend to the ceremony." So that's how I got at least enough comfort to like, okay, this is legitimate.
Right. Right. And so you follow the diet, you abstain from the things they want you to abstain from. And the diet beforehand, I think, is pretty much avoid meat and dairy for the most part, right?
Yeah, it's a lot of like avoiding all processed foods too, like
Okay.
processed sugar, processed, a lot of things like that.
Just garbage. Yeah. So after talking to the nutritionist, you feel comfortable going to the ceremony. So Ruger, I think there were a lot of interesting points in your life that were relevant to your first ayahuasca experience. Can we dive into those a little bit?
Yeah.
Cool.
So I'm going to talk about a few events that are seemingly random and disconnected,
Okay.
but they have an incredible amount of relevancy to what happened in the first ceremony.
Okay.
So the first thing, and this is something that happened almost 15 years ago. So my dad had a mental breakdown 15 years ago, and it happened basically on an airplane.
Oh.
So he was on a chartered flight from Canada, and he had a breakdown and thought the plane was being taken over by terrorists. He ended up getting into an altercation with a male flight attendant, and it was completely unexpected. Like, but anyway, he's okay now too. By the way, he's
Good. Good. Good.
happily in Florida. But he was in a mental institution for a while in Ohio. The first time we saw him, he did not recognize the family.
Whoa.
So it was a scary, like, traumatic thing. But eventually, like, he got stabilized. They let him go back home. Over the course of about a year, all this stuff was resolved.
Right.
During that year, when he went back home to Nevada, he got assigned a doctor.
Okay.
And the doctor's name was well, I can't tell the doctor's name, but he got assigned in Nevada,
Right.
in the top of the state where they live. Okay, then jump to about 6 years ago from now for me. I was in Las Vegas, and I was struggling. I was struggling mentally pretty bad. It got
Right.
to the point where I needed to check myself into a place.
Okay.
So I checked myself into a place, and I go see the doctor there.
Right.
And the doctor, here's my last name, which is Abear,
Right.
not common. And then he's like, what's your dad's name? And he's like, I can't say anything because of the
HIPAA. Yeah.
but you should ask. So it ends up being the exact same doctor that saw my dad,
Whoa.
living in a different city. I mean, 7-8 hours away, 8 years, 10 years later.
Whoa.
Okay, so then
I
that
got
doctor,
chills. I got chills, man.
yeah. Well, it keeps going. So
Okay.
that doctor then recommended this therapist that
Yeah.
eventually did ayahuasca. Okay. So then there's another event too that so during this span of seeing this therapist, it was also during COVID. And during COVID, things got pretty bad for me in the sense that, I mean, I had a job, but I wasn't working.
Okay.
You could walk down the street of the Las Vegas Strip
Right.
and yourself. There's no cars. It was like a zombie movie.
Right.
And then there was no end to it. So for a while, my MO for the day was drink and watch Netflix.
Right.
And that's what I started doing. Just I got into this cycle. So eventually I decided to go to rehab for it because I was just like in this constant state of like I'm isolated, I'm not seeing anybody, I'm in this pattern.
Right.
And if anything, it was something to break out of this cycle, right? Which the therapist recommended.
Right.
So I go to rehab, and in rehab, I end up getting into a relationship with a person,
Okay.
girl. Don't recommend getting into a relationship with a person from rehab, but
Sure.
it ended up. It was a situation where the person broke up with me and then kept would leave and then come back and leave and come back and leave and come back.
Right.
It's just not the healthiest thing for me. It was kind of this emotional roller coaster, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so all these are going to be relevant to the ayahuasca experience, right? So let's jump back to it's about a week before the ceremony starts. I'm like, all right, I'm in. I'm going to do this. Let's do this, right?
Right.
So the person that I was in the relationship with, she says that she's going to come see me again, and it happens and stay with me. And so it happens to be the same weekend of the ayahuasca. So I'm just like, can I swear? Fuck ayahuasca. Like I'm not doing that. I'm gonna stay with her, and it's gonna be great. Everything's gonna be back to everything, right?
Right.
So it's about 2 days before the ceremony starts, and I get a text. From her, and it says, I'm coming to Vegas, and I'm not gonna see you.
Oh.
Right. So I'm in my car, and this is important because it's gonna have some relevance to the ceremony. So I'm in my car by myself. I'm not talking to her. I'm not talking to anybody, and I'm just angry.
Sure.
I'm saying bad, negative things about her and women and everything. Just this barrage of negativity like coming out of my mouth, right?
Right.
So then, I guess I compose myself, and I'm like, all right, well, I will guess I will do this ceremony. So I go into this ceremony, and I guess immediately, when you walk into just the room and you can feel the energy of like, okay, this is safe. Like, this is nice. This is comfortable.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That or the opposite. You walk into a room and you're like, I shouldn't be here right now.
Right.
So you walk into the ceremony room and it felt good.
Yeah. Like, honestly, you probably think it would be one of those two things.
Okay.
So this one felt good though, and I felt comfortable. And then, so the shaman comes out, and immediately too with him, very humble. You could tell right away it's not about him.
Right.
Willing to answer any questions whatsoever, without taking offense to anything. Just very humble, wanting to explain things. Made me feel comfortable too, as well.
Right.
Because I got to reiterate too, I am this person who's very skeptical of everything, and I have this belief: you live, you suffer, and you die. And now I'm in a room with a bunch of people taking ayahuasca and a shaman.
It's that I completely understand how vastly different that is from your state of mind previously. And was just curious, was the shaman Humberto?
It was.
Oh, cool. Okay. Very
Same
cool.
guy. Yeah. All right. So then they do some types of rituals and stuff. And then everyone takes it. And the way I was positioned in the room, I happened to be the first one to go.
Well, just so no one, like, people who have never done this, we're not talking, when you said rituals, we're not like, no one's sacrificing a goat or anything like that. You're probably talking about the smoke that they blow around your head or on top of your head. And
I guess tradition is a better word than ritual.
Sure,
Uh,
sure.
I mean, he grew up in the United States, a
Yes,
shaman. Then he also went to Peru and did training amongst like indigenous Shipibo tribes in Peru. And
right.
so he combines some of the stuff that is traditional, which is like, yeah, he, blows the smoke on the crown of your hands and your head. I mean,
Well,
that's basically
totally.
it.
That's basically it, right? Okay. So you said you're positioned in the room such where you're gonna get
My
it.
order, so everyone goes up and takes a cup of ayahuasca. It's called a tea, but it does not taste like a tea.
Sludge. It's like
Right.
sludge, kind of, yeah. And it tastes like, my experience was, it tastes exactly like you think sludge would taste like.
Yeah, it's kind of like a shot of wheatgrass and dirt, and I mean that's what it would taste like, right?
Yes, yes, that's perfect. That's perfect. Yeah.
So I take this, and then everyone else does, and then 4 hours go by, almost 4 hours, and for me, nothing happens,
Right.
nothing. And so you have people that are laughing and crying, and at some point we can talk about the experience of what it's like itself. So everyone's experience is different, and every time you do it, it's different. But so I take it, and then almost 4 hours go by and nothing happens. And so you can probably imagine, like, I'm just like, okay, like, what
Right.
is going on? Did I get bad shit? Did
Yeah.
I, is nothing's going to work for me? Okay. Like nothing's going to work for me. This is
Oh,
another, just, this is,
oh
this,
man.
this is,
That'd be a
yeah.
devastating moment for you because you're kind of at the end of your rope. You're like, your therapist is like, I don't know what else to do. You've gone to rehab.
I tried every
Man.
antidepressant.
Yeah.
I tried all kinds of different therapies. So this is like, yeah.
Ugh.
So in my frustration, I am writing about the events that had happened with my dad with the airplane, right?
Yeah.
And so as I'm doing this, there's a person that comes over, and she's kind of a person that's working with the group, kind of affiliated with them.
Okay.
And again, I want to reiterate that like everyone's experience is different. I've never had anything happen like this again.
Okay.
Okay. So she comes over and she says, I'm a healer. Can I help you? And even when she said the word healer, I'm just like,
You're like, oh yeah, yeah,
oh,
you are.
whatever. Do your thing, healer. So she sits down in front of me though. And then the first thing she says is she says, wow, she says, you're really channeling your dad right now. And so then I'm just like, I'm just like bullshit.
Sure.
Bullshit. Like you saw me writing in my journal, and so she's very calm, and she's like, well, first of all, it's dark in here. She's like, second of all, I don't have my glasses on. And then third, she takes out a blindfold and puts a blindfold on herself.
Whoa.
Right. um, but I'm like, okay, let's see where this goes. Um, and then she holds my hand. And so she starts telling me all these very, very specific things that happened with my dad. Very specific things. Then she starts telling me about another situation that happened with a person at work. Then she starts telling me about personal habits I needed to change.
And she's being very specific in this.
It's very specific, and I'm not saying anything.
So Ruger, she's not like, oh, and you fought with someone at work, but she got, and we don't need the details, but unless you want to share them, but she got specific about something that happened with someone at work.
She was talking about my dad and being on a plane.
Oh, geez.
And so I'm just trying to, because, and also like I'm very well aware of like what cold reading is.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
Like, people that use those techniques.
Okay.
But so I'm sitting there while this is happening, and my mind is just racing because I'm trying to find this explanation of what's
Right.
going on. And I also it felt like my mind was in, if you've ever been in a house in a really bad storm and you can feel the house moving,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what I felt like. My brain was inside the house.
Whoa.
So, but anyway, I'm trying to find an explanation to what's happening, right? And so I'm like, I got it. I have told the therapist all of this stuff.
Oh.
So I'm like, that's what it is. I've told the therapist all this.
Sure.
They're in on some
Right.
magic trick to get me to help me.
Sure. Okay.
About 30 seconds after this thought comes into my mind, and I have complete explanation and rationalization of what happens. This woman who's sitting there in front of me with the blindfold on kind of turns her head and she says, "Why were you saying such bad things about women in your car yesterday?"
Whoa.
So that's something that
Whoa.
I was not talking to anybody. I was not talking to the woman. Well, I had not told anybody that, never. And
Wow.
so in that moment, I had a complete just, I realized that everything I'd ever known or decided that this is what life is and this is what happens and this is this, I was wrong about. It was such a humbling and opening experience. I felt like in that moment, I felt like my mind, just all the walls, just my mind exploded. And
Right.
I had this massive, just emotional release in that moment of like all the things that I just like held in and repressed and stuffed down. And
Wow.
I started crying. I
Sure.
um, I started crying. I the the woman that was holding my hand had trouble doing it because she could feel like the pain flowing out. Um,
Wow.
and then that was like the start of everything. Like, because I complete shift. Like, I went into it of this basically belief: you live, you suffer, you die, and I
Right.
came out completely different perspective on life and how things work and myself and everything.
Well, and a skeptic would say, well, she did that so that you could pay her at the end, or she did that so she could hook you on some coaching plan or something. But I've gone to ceremonies in Mexico with you, and she was there to help. She was
She
there to
was
help you.
Yeah, she was in that just for helping. And also, a skeptic could say whatever they want. It's like that. Like, I was the most skeptical person in the world, and there's
Yeah.
no explanation for what happened. Like, it was a
Right.
spiritual and mystical, and yeah, and her role was to serve.
It's amazing. That's amazing.
It was the most powerful thing by far I've ever done
Right.
for mental health, spiritual health.
Right.
Um, yeah.
Right. And I've had so many people ask me if it's something that one could get addicted to. And the best analogy I can I can find is, for me, it's like getting addicted to getting a root canal. It's necessary, but it's not something you want to do all the time.
That's a really good analogy, honestly. It is incredibly beneficial.
Right.
It's not always something that's easy.
Ruger, can we discuss a little bit more about what plant medicine actually does to the body?
Sure. So again, it is important to realize that like everyone's experience is different, and
Right.
every time even you do it, it's different. But so something it really does is we have these behaviors that we do as humans,
Right.
and some of those are unhealthy behaviors. And so things like addiction,
Right.
and it could be anything. It doesn't matter. Or sometimes when I view addiction, it's like it's ways to escape.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
Ways to escape things like, I mean, things like alcohol,
Right.
It could be anything. It could be anything.
Food,
From food to shopping to whatever.
shopping. Yep.
A lot of the reasons of why we do those behaviors is because we're trying to not feel something. We're trying to hide from something. And
Yes.
so something that ayahuasca does is it almost strips away those things, and it makes you go deep into what the reason why you're doing those in the first place are.
Right.
And so that's something that is incredibly healing, but it's also not something that's a pleasant
No.
experience.
No, not at all. Yeah. I mean, because the reasons we don't want to feel those things is because of the negativeness, the negative energy associated with whatever it is we have to deal with. And that's why some people, it's so intense. That's why some people vomit. That's why you have to run to the restroom. That's why you sweat and cry. I think on your website it says 7 years of therapy in 7 days.
Something like that. And again, not a therapist, but it's a
Right.
Okay. If you imagine, because when we started this podcast, you said there's so many people that can relate, or at least know somebody that can relate. So if you imagine the belief set that I had going in, there's so many people that also have that mindset.
Yeah.
And they have it because of just what they've experienced in life. It's just an experience. And so having even just some type of experience that's similar to where the shift in mindset happens, the shift in perspective happens,
right?
That's where the benefit comes in.
Yes. Yeah, well said. Absolutely well said. And it's, to anyone who's interested in learning more, you could always go to Google and type in ayahuasca studies. There are all sorts of universities, mostly not in the United States, because I think probably because of big pharma, but there are some in the United States as well, studying ayahuasca and samadhi and bufo and all these things because of the benefits for mental health.
Yeah, something else it does, which is, this is still the scientific research is relatively in its infancy.
Yeah.
But it has like a neuroplasticity effect on the brain.
Okay.
And it can actually rewire fear parts of the brain.
Okay.
For example, like if a younger person gets bit by a dog when they're young, they have all of these neural pathways that when they see a dog, they associate
danger,
the danger, and the fear comes up.
Right.
And so something that ayahuasca can do is actually wire those pathways, so the fear isn't as intense.
Right.
And I'll actually give you an example of myself.
Okay.
So during this time of my life, I was a poker dealer.
Okay.
And I always had kind of this, I still do, some amount of social anxiety behind with people. Okay. And as a poker dealer, like if you make a mistake, right, all the eyes are on you.
Yes.
And I noticed that the difference before doing this and the difference after, the social anxiety and stuff was still there, but it was like the volume was turned down.
Wow.
And it was basically because some of that fear was very, very much reduced.
Wow. That's huge. That's huge. I mean, that's a day-to-day thing that you would be confronted with, but you said it's still there. It's just lessened. That's incredible. So Ruger, after your first ceremony, how long did it take for you to do a second and a third ceremony?
Well, I decided, this is for me. I decided that because of the fact that this was the best thing I'd ever done for mental health, that I was going to do it once a month.
Wow.
So I basically went on this path of doing it once a month. I got a lot out of it. But I think it's important to say, like, nobody needs ayahuasca. Nobody needs ayahuasca, but it's very helpful. And another thing is nobody's broken. Nobody's broken. Nobody needs to be fixed. But what it does is it helps you remind you, it strips away some of those layers we put up ourselves, and
Right.
helps you remind you who you are and that you are not broken and you don't need to be fixed.
I love that you said that, because so many times you find people who have found a thing that worked for them, and that's the cure for everything. So it's really cool to hear you say that.
Thanks.
So you did ayahuasca once a month for a year?
It was about a year, about 8 months. Okay, and here's this is kind of a side thing, but here's an example that popped into my mind.
Yeah,
Okay,
please.
so in Lord of the Rings, right?
Okay.
There's that king, and there's the guy talking into his ear. That I think the guy talking into his ear is Wormtongue.
Okay.
Okay, and you got this king, and he's all like, it's all shriveled and white, and he has cobwebs all over him.
Oh,
You got
yes.
you got this guy talking into his ear, saying like, it's basically like, you suck,
Yeah.
you know. And so sometimes we have this voice that's doing that, and its
Yes.
own mind, creating this person that's just, talking into our ear. So sometimes ayahuasca comes and it basically like kicks that person out. And then even in the movie, when the worm tongue got kicked out, the king comes back and he's all, cobwebs are off of him and he looks great.
Right.
So for me, the reason why I did it once a month, though, for a while, is because I still wanted to have this person come and talk and say negative things in my ear. And so the
Right.
reason I kind of did it once a month for a while is it slowly and slowly, that negative self-talk, that thing in my ear, just kind of went away.
Right. No, for me, that sensation was, it stopped after the samadhi experience. And I remember sitting there on the on the on the pathway between the place you do the ceremony and my room, and I just sat there, and for the first time in a long time, my mind was silent, and I could hear myself better than I had been able to since I don't know when. And that's a great analogy that you just used. And I remember that scene from Lord of the Rings very vividly. It's and then in that moment, just side note, in that moment, I realized, wow, all the things that I thought were holding me back were kind of um done to myself. I put my own roadblocks up in front of myself. And that's the good news, because the only person that can remove them is me. I don't have to wait on anyone else to help me overcome the things that I was struggling with. Um,
Well, and those roadblocks, I mean, I still do it. I still do it. It's not this perfect magic wand thing,
sure, sure, absolutely,
but it does, because you can still put your own roadblocks up with or without it.
totally,
But I think it's something that's more helpful to help you identify there are roadblocks you're putting up in the first place.
right, right, yeah, well said. So you did ayahuasca every month for 8 months or so, and then there was a point here where you thought, "Wait a second, I could." When I did a retreat with you a year ago, I said, Ruger, you're a bridge between cultures. You're a bridge between here and there. So what was the point where you thought, you know what, I could devote some time into this and help other people experience what I've experienced?
Well, again, some of it I just fell into. So I did it about once a month for about 8 months. Over the course of this time, this actually could be a whole other podcast.
Okay,
This,
cool. Yeah.
but the short version is, so I did about once a month for about 8 months. Over the course of the time, I became friends with the shaman.
Yeah.
Um, Actually, at one point in another ceremony, I had this, I guess, calling to do something that helped people. Uh,
Wow.
that's again, like a whole other experience I could talk about, but it was like in a ceremony, I had this wake up call, calling that I needed to do something to help people. Um, but anyway, I became friends with him, and eventually he invited me to come to Mexico, where he's been doing ceremonies for local people there for about 5 years now.
Okay.
This place in Mexico called the Finca,
Right.
Finca El Pendulo,
Right.
and it is a place that could also probably have its own podcast, but it
Sure.
was started by a woman named Marina Melgarejo.
Okay.
She inherited it from her brother, and at the time she was also just looking to do something, I guess, positive in the world. So she just started building this place. And you've been there. Like, it's hard to put into words.
It's hard to put into words. It's how many acres is it? Do you know?
Oh, 15
acres. A beautiful estate. There's a what do you call the place you do the ceremony? The hut.
Osho hut.
Osho hut. That's right. The Osho hut. And then there's accommodations for everyone who does the retreat. There's a pool. There's a sweat lodge. There's a fully staffed kitchen. There's a sanctuary for wolves, and we actually went through the gate and hung out with the wolves for a minute.
Horses. There's and everything that's been built there kind of has a story behind it.
Yes.
For life.
Yes. Well, what's the circle called with the pillars that we did the fire ceremony at?
Oracle.
The Oracle. Yes. That's a magic place.
Yeah.
It's a magic estate for sure.
Yeah, I mean, pictures do help, but even the pictures don't always do it justice. That's something that everyone that comes, when they come, that's something that it's a lot bigger than they imagine, and just a lot more just breathtaking than they imagine. Some of the pictures, like,
right,
the places that are created there.
Right.
So I got invited there, and then and this is the short version, but I got invited there. I saw the ceremonies there, and then I was looking to do something, I guess, that helped people. So I just put two and two together. Like, you have this beautiful space with all these rooms.
Right.
You have a shaman who's been doing this for several years, who lives in Mexico. And so I kind of just suggested, like, why has nobody ever thought to do retreats here?
Right.
And the owner and the shaman are basically say, like, well, why don't you do it? And that's kind of how this started.
Wow. That's incredible. And you've had people from across the world show up to these retreats. It's incredible.
Yeah, it is incredible. One of the things that I wanted to do when I started this too is there's a lot of places that you can do ayahuasca at.
Yeah.
The two main places, though, are you have one that is more in the jungle,
yeah,
in Peru, or then you have other places, and it's more like a clinical setting.
Yes.
More in a clinical setting, and there's not a whole lot of places in between.
Right.
And so
until now.
This is a place that's in between, and I think the other thing that when I had this in mind, is I wanted it to be for anybody, and I wanted it to be for people that were just like myself.
Yeah.
So at this point, we've had people from Japan, Australia, and everywhere in between.
Right.
And every walk of life too. There's been psychiatrists who've come. There's been chiropractors. There have been pediatric physicians, and then there's been also just normal people, just completely from all walks of life.
Right. Absolutely incredible. How often are your retreats? Every 6 weeks or so?
About once a month at the moment.
A month. Okay, great. So I learned about it because my mom had died. My mom passed away a few years ago, and I was feeling low, ups and downs, and then I didn't want to do antidepressants because I had done that in my early 20s, and it's it seemed like something that there was no end to. You just take it and you're on it forever and whatever. I didn't want to do that. So I was looking up alternatives to antidepressants, and ketamine came up. And there's ketamine clinics throughout the country for PTSD, depression, anxiety, all sorts of stuff, with a lot of success stories behind it. So I went to a ketamine clinic here, and I don't know if you're familiar, but they hook you up to this IV for 45 minutes. They slowly drip ketamine through your system, lasts for 45 minutes, 15 minutes of recovery, and then you're on your way. And it was helpful, but ketamine's synthetic. And while it was helpful, I did feel gross for a while afterwards. And actually during it, I thought something went wrong. Something happened to the machine. Lights start flashing. The nurse runs in, or the doctor runs in, and I thought I died. I literally thought I died, and I guess that's part of the experience. But I looked up, and the hardest thing to explain, but I thought I was space dust, and I was okay with it. And so 45 minutes later, I'm back to normal and on my way. And then a few years later, I learned about ayahuasca originally on the Joe Rogan podcast, and I researched it and watched videos of people's experiences. And then I have a family member who's a friend of yours, and she introduced us to you. And it came at the right time in my life when I needed it, which was summer of 2022. And that's the thing about this, is it's not something, and you've been very clear at this, there's no sales pitch here. You're just sharing your experience. I'm sharing mine. It's been beneficial for me. But it has to be right, and it has to be at the right time. It's not like you're selling tickets to an amusement park or anything like that. I mean, if the stars align,
Not the same amount of throwing
go
up.
for it. Yeah. Oh, for me, for sure. But if the stars align, go for it. But if not, don't do it.
Yeah. First, I'll say, so I've taken every antidepressant there was on the market, and I've also done ketamine.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Clinical setting.
Yeah, same.
Like I'll say, even antidepressants, I'm not going to be a person that says like those are not important, those are not useful.
Totally.
Because for me, at some point in my life, antidepressants brought me from like a suicidal to a zombie.
Okay.
And I kind of stayed at a zombie.
Okay.
But still, that's a massive improvement.
Sure.
It's just they don't address the root cause,
Right.
and they don't really. You're kind of just emotionless, right?
Sure.
And then ketamine, for me, it was very interesting to have kind of like the dissociative effect,
Right.
And that is something that even that can be kind of a little groundbreaking, but
Sure.
it still doesn't really get to any of the causes of why
Right.
that was happening in the first place.
Right.
And so with ayahuasca, it gets to the causes, but you should also be ready for what's there.
Right.
So there's kind of an expression that's used in like the jungle, and it's that the plant is ready for anyone anytime, but not everyone is ready for the plant.
I can see that. Ruger, can we talk a little bit about the overall experience that people seem to have with ayahuasca? And I know it's different for everyone, and it's different for everyone every time, right?
So the best mentality to go into it is one with as little expectations as possible.
Totally.
Almost this attitude of surrendering, not in like a defeatist way, but just
Right.
surrendering to the fact that whatever it is showing me is what I'm supposed to be seeing.
Right.
Another common expression is that ayahuasca does not give you what you want; it gives you what you need.
Right.
But overall, it's something that addresses the things the self-imposed barriers that you've kind of put up that have defined you.
Right. Right.
And getting through some of those is an interesting process, because even in the same night, even in the same span of an hour, there can be some difficult emotions come up.
Right.
There can be some trauma that comes up. There's also just there's a common experience of people purging or throwing up.
Yes.
Usually, it's usually not really a physical need to throw up. It's like a mental and emotional need to kind of release those things.
Yes.
And then also, so once some of those things are released and once some of those barriers are gone, then
Right.
there are moments too where it's pure bliss.
Right.
And overall, it's kind of a huge just shift in perspective.
Yes. Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
people are usually they have a sometimes they have beautiful experiences the entire night. Sometimes they have pretty difficult ones.
Right.
But in the morning, there's usually a shift in how they view themselves, how they view the world, how they view past experiences, and kind of this sense of gratitude.
Oh, I'm reminded of breakfast the morning after each ceremony. The energy is different from, earlier before the ceremony.
Something I forgot to mention too, related to my first ceremony, is so when all those things happen and I had this emotional release, also during that night, I got this almost this it showed me like these kind of puzzle pieces.
Yeah.
So it went back and it showed me like this experience with my dad ended up connecting him to a doctor. Years later, the doctor gets connected to me. Then there's this connection to the therapist. Then the therapist recommends the rehab where I meet the girl, and then the girl, then the ceremony itself. And like for me to be where I'm at right now,
Right.
every single thing had to happen, and it had to happen in the way it happened. And so you kind of I look back, I don't have any hard feelings or any resentments towards any single thing that happened in those times.
Wow. Wow.
Like all of those feelings that were negative, even about a relationship that didn't work out,
Right.
or things that happened with my dad, like it wasn't instant, but it was like those resentments got replaced with like gratitude.
Wow, that's powerful. So healing too. I mean, my goodness, for me, I won't get into too many specifics, but some people have experiences where they communicate with family members that have passed during their ayahuasca experience. For me, I didn't really have that, but my kid's mom, who's very well alive, I saw her today and yesterday, and I see her like every day, almost. She had messages for me, and it's as though at the time, or probably even now, my mind knew who I would listen to, who I would take advice from, who I respect, whose opinion matters to me, and those people spoke to me. I saw my kids. My kids are young; they're all very much alive, but they had messages for me, which is so fascinating how this works. I saw my parents as children, which when we see our parents as youngsters and what they went through as youngsters, who says youngsters? I'm not, it's like I'm 90 years old. When you see your parents as whippersnappers, I don't know why I'm using these words. It puts them in a different light and has caused me, and I have great parents, but it causes you to show a little bit more grace for some of the things that happened when you were a kid. Because for me, just realizing that my parents are just figuring life out as I am trying to figure out my life right now. You know, I remember when my dad was 36, I thought he was so old. I turned 41 next week. So, you know, it's ayahuasca was very, like I said, ayahuasca was very, very beneficial for me in so many ways.
Yeah, I mean, how wild is it to be able to, it's almost like, the expression of putting yourself in somebody else's shoes,
Yeah.
but it's like, I don't know, putting yourself in somebody else's body for a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
That sometimes, I don't know, it's an opportunity that a lot of people don't even get to ever experience in their life.
Well, and that's why I wanted to talk to you on this podcast, is because I want this to be in the proverbial medicine cabinet for when people are at a point where nothing else has worked. And like you said, nothing wrong with antidepressants. Ketamine had a benefit to both of us. But when you're at the end of your rope and you feel like there's nothing else that's going to work, try this, and try yoga, and try all sorts of other things. But this is one that has been beneficial to a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, for me, even for myself now, I do a lot of like healthy and mindfulness activities, but I wouldn't have ever, I don't think I ever would have even started doing them without having some kind of like breakthrough.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I go running. I don't like running at all, but
Right.
I feel kind of like I should.
So the longest side note, the longest I've ever ran, and I'll give you my trick here. The longest I've ever ran, I think it was 11 miles. And what you do is you have your run end at a restaurant. And so there's a place downtown in this town that my kids like. And so I'll time it out, and then I'll tell them when I'm like a mile away, and I'll have a change of clothes in the car. And if it's good food, hey, you can run 30 miles. Just
You
have a
have
good
a
destination.
reward system built
Yeah.
in?
Yeah, it's the best. It's the absolute best. But that's been a minute since I've done that. That's great.
Well, I guess something to note too is you don't have to be like in a state of crisis or something like that. But there's plenty of people that come to the retreat that just want to kind of be a little bit better humans, and they just have a little bit more awareness in their
They're
life.
so obnoxious, those people. Just kidding. No, I'm learning this now.
You have to come from desperation.
No, this is so true. And it's probably best to wait until you're not in crisis to do these things. But so often, you know, it's not until the check engine light turns on that we decide to get a tune up, right?
Yeah.
That's funny. That's really funny. Ruger, can we talk about trauma and kind of the basis of trauma and what you think it is?
Yeah. So trauma is a word that it it has certain implications, right?
Yeah.
There are different levels of trauma. Of course there are. But really what trauma is what it goes down to is a very basic feeling of that we are in an extreme amount of danger or that we could die.
Right.
There's certain events that happen in our lives where we don't have like the mental capacity or the awareness to realize that those events aren't like that. For example,
Right.
you're a child.
Yeah.
If you're a child and then you were told to like be quiet or anytime you spoke up too much, it was like you were getting in trouble for that, right?
Right.
You can absolutely associate that as a child with, okay, I can't speak, and if I do, then my parents don't love me, and if I'm not this expectation of what my parents want, then they will abandon me,
Right.
and they won't love me, and then I will die.
Right.
And those are things that we all of us have them, of experiences that are traumatic, and they're all different for everybody.
Sure.
You can have the exact same person in that situation, and 20, 30 years later in life, no effect.
Right.
And so there's all these small traumas that we all experience in our life, that kind of define who we are as people. And so something that ayahuasca does is it kind of takes you back, and it does not, it's not reliving trauma, but it's revisiting trauma. And so
Right.
we can heal from some of those things. And then again, there's different levels of trauma. Some of them are much more significant,
Sure.
for a person, but it's something that helps you heal from them by revisiting them.
Well, and would I be right in saying that most people kind of revisit these things as a, I don't know, not as a third party, but as you're just kind of outside of yourself observing what happened, so you can put it in perspective and understand where everyone was at the time. Is that accurate?
Yeah, typically I think it's more of a having them being seen as an observer.
Yeah. So Mexi Soul, your ayahuasca retreat, what makes Mexi Soul different from the other retreats out there that do ayahuasca, that offer ayahuasca rather?
Sure. Well, I kind of already covered this, but so one thing that is different is that there's basically two settings that you can go do ayahuasca in right now. One of them is more, you're in the jungle, you're probably sleeping in like a hammock with a lot of mosquitoes, and then there's other places that are more like a clinical setting where you're in a very nice room.
Right.
And then this is something that's kind of right in between.
Right. Yeah, so when I went, I had a private bedroom, I had a private bathroom. There are shared rooms at Mexi Soul, right?
There are.
Dormitories type rooms. But yeah, I guess that's a good way to put it, because I had a mattress, I had a window that opened and closed. I didn't have to worry. I wasn't on a hammock with a mosquito net around me. And I'm sure that is great for a lot of people. For me, the whole experience was so new. I'm glad it wasn't the clinical, and I'm glad I wasn't in the jungle worrying about snakes. It was like that hybrid, like you said.
Yeah. I think another thing, we've kind of adopted this philosophy that really the retreat, it's not about me. It's not about my story. It's not about ayahuasca. It's not about the finca. It's not about the shaman. It's about the people that come. And that's kind of how it's about you. And that's really like how we introduce it from the very beginning to the end. It's about the people that come. And really, like, there's a really high level of respect given to the people that come. If whatever, if you got social anxiety or some issues, or then be like, own that part of you, be yourself, and it's just we support that, right? And it's a safe place to express and release and be yourself.
Yeah, I can testify to that. I experienced it myself.
It's very magical to sometimes when I'm walking around, and you have this table where you have, let's say, 4 people eating there, and you have one person from a different country, and then an age difference of 30 years,
Right.
and a completely different ethnicity, and a completely different background,
Right.
and all sitting there connecting, and basically the same purpose of healing.
Right. Right. Just side note, in the finca, there's different places to sit. There's these giant boulders that you can sit on and meditate or journal or whatever. I don't just sit. I never just sit, like, ever. I'm always doing something or going somewhere. For the first time, and I don't know how long, at the finca, I just sat, and I took my flip-flops off and buried my toes in the dirt. And there was a little spider, just a tiny little guy. He crawled on the boulder, and I put my finger out, and he crawled on my hand. It transformed me. Now you have to keep up with this, right? I still have a hard time. I have a hard time sitting again. I need to keep up on these things, but what a magical place.
Yeah.
When someone signs up for the retreat, they can choose their own bedroom or they can choose a shared room. And then what amenities are available to participants?
Well, you really have three choices in the room type. So one of them is just a shared room that's kind of like a dormitory style.
Okay.
And then you have another that's just private room, private bathroom. And then we also have two other rooms that are a little bit nicer, like they have a jacuzzi bathtub inside of them.
Oh, nice.
Those are basically the three styles of the rooms. And then just to kind of give you an overview of like what's included in the retreat and then what is available at the Finca itself. So there's three plant medicine ceremonies. You can choose if you'd like to do ayahuasca for all three. But what we typically do is it's ayahuasca, samadhi, and then ayahuasca. We also do combo before each of the ayahuasca ceremonies. And then we also give people the option to do bufo. So something else that makes this place unique is all of those, the three medicines of ayahuasca, samadhi, and bufo are all DMT based.
Okay.
I don't know of another place anywhere that offers all three of those.
Wow.
Samadhi is something that is native to Mexico. The DMT source is a plant that's native to Mexico.
Right.
And then during the retreat itself, there's, in addition to the three ceremonies, the two combo, there's yoga, there's a meditation, there is a fire circle ceremony, there is a temazcal, which is a Mexican sweat lodge. And then as far as
that was cool. That was intense, and like cool is the wrong word. It was hot, but that was intense.
Yeah, it's kind of symbolic of a rebirth.
Yes. I can see that.
We do it at the end too, because you're sitting very close to people. So we do it at the end, or by the time people kind of get.
We're all friends by that point. Yeah.
And then the place itself also has a pool. It just has a massive. You mentioned places to sit. There's plenty of places to sit. There's horses, there's dogs, there's two wolves, there's a lot of animals. And then there's a rotating thing of activities that we kind of changed to make it different for each retreat.
Oh, cool.
And sometimes based on the volunteers that are there.
Okay. Yeah.
So for example, right now, currently, there's a pottery studio there. And right now, cool. There happens to be a pottery teacher, a volunteer that came and knows how to do that. So that's not something, not something always offered, but it's kind of this rotating set of activities based on the knowledge and skill set of the volunteers that are there.
When I was there, it was art therapy. We painted on a canvas or something. It was really cool. Yeah. You mentioned, side note, medicines and plant medicines, right? This phrase, I quickly learned the difference between a drug and a medicine, because I think a drug would be like recreational drug would be something someone does for fun or to escape or whatever, fun for lack of a better word, right? But a medicine is so much different than that. A medicine is something that you take to heal something, and it may not be a fun experience, but that's not the purpose of a medicine, is it? The purpose of a medicine is to heal in some way.
Yeah. I view the difference between a drug and a medicine as a drug is something that lowers consciousness, and medicines that we're having are something that raise consciousness.
I should have said, Ruger, what's the difference between a drug and a medicine? That's a great explanation of it. Yeah, totally.
And I guess another thing too is I do think one of our philosophies is the fact that nobody actually needs to do this, and that people are not broken.
Right.
We just need help remembering and acknowledging who they are.
Well, for me, it happened primarily, well, the ayahuasca ceremonies for sure, but I don't know if you recall, you've done a lot of ceremonies between then and now, but during the samadhi ceremony, you're given 2 doses, an hour or 2 apart or so. When I went up, Humberto handed me both doses. And I said, "Are you sure both at the same time?" And he's like, "Yes." And he gave it to me and said a prayer or something. And I took them. And during the samadhi ceremony, everyone's kind of laid back and they're meditating, listening to music. And most people have a blindfold on just to block out the light. It was so intense for me. And if I get too deep into it, I'm gonna shed a tear, but or a lot of tears. But it was so intense for me. After like 20 minutes, I got up and I sat outside, and I let's see if my screensaver on my phone rotates between, okay, it rotates between my kids and this, and I'll put it on the screen so everyone can see it. But I sat here, I took this like the next day, I sat there and just thought of all the things I struggle with in life, and then I would puke. And then I thought about all the mistakes that I've made with, raising kids and just everything else in my relationships with friends and family. And it's so intense that you purge, but at the end you feel fantastic. I mean, you feel lighter, you feel free. But I will never forget that experience. And I took the photo, so I will never forget that experience and how just beautiful it was.
Yeah, that's awesome.
You're a bridge, Ruger. You're a bridge between cultures and people.
I appreciate you saying that. I didn't ever plan on being that, but
that's great though. That makes it even more magical, because if that was like, hey, when I was 12, everyone else wanted to be a firefighter or cop, I wanted to be a bridge between people. I mean, yeah, I think it lands better organically the way it happened.
Yeah, life's interesting.
Indeed. Obviously, when anyone goes to Mexisol, their privacy is respected, and we would never share anything about a fellow guest or volunteer or anyone that works with you. I mean, that's all confidential and private. But in a broad sense, are there any stories that you could share, generally speaking, of some of the healing that you've seen or transformation you've seen people experience during an ayahuasca retreat?
Sure. So yeah, I also can't get into specifics, but there's a lot of people that really do come in with the same mentality that I went into my first ceremony with. And so there's a lot of manifestations in other people's lives that are a result of that like perspective and outlook and mentality on the world. So there are a lot of people that are struggling with addiction or alcohol or drugs or depression or suicidal ideation or things like that. And you can sometimes, for me, like I can just see it
right
in their eyes, like when they get there.
Right.
And so that's something that's so rewarding and incredible to watch, because it's there's people that have these massive transformations. They do it quickly. So during here's an example. During the retreat, we take a lot of pictures just to share with amongst the group themselves.
Yeah.
And so what I do is when the retreat's over, I go through all the pictures, and so it's all the ones that I go through at the end, and then to the beginning, and you see everyone get. I see everyone get. People get progressively sadder because they go from the end when they have all this like transformative experience and everyone's smiling and the lights back in their eyes, and then when they first got there.
Oh wow,
it's a very good reminder.
So you're talking about, you see the photos in reverse order from when they were taken because they're on your phone or whatever, so they get sadder, but in chronological order they're getting happier. It's interesting. when I went, I sat at the table near the kitchen when we first got there, and we're just talking like, why are you here? Why are you here? And everyone has this reason they're there. And then by day like 3 or 4, the truth comes out, because they've, after a few ceremonies, they've healed some of the reason that why they were actually there. And people reveal, like, actually, it's not because of X, Y, and Z. I'm here because of this. And some of the stories are really intense. And it's just so cool to see that, not just in myself, but in other people in real time.
Okay, I'll give you a story because the guy said I could kind of share it.
Cool.
So I'm not, but I'll give you a story. So before the start of the first retreat, it was the very first retreat we had. And this is so it's a small group. It's mostly my friends and family. And then me, it's the first thing doing it. So I'm very like nervous and worried
Sure.
and everything, right? So it's 3 days before the retreat starts, and there's a guy that shows up, and he's from the local town there. He did not even know there was a retreat happening. So he shows up, he's on the terrace outside by the pool, and he's just an absolute mess. Um, he has no shirt on. He's clearly like been going through some things.
Right. Right.
You know, everyone out there is avoiding him, avoiding eye contact,
Sure.
everything. And
Right.
then me, I'm like, okay, I gotta figure out what's going on with this guy. There's a retreat happening.
Right.
Uh, so I made this decision in my mind. I'm just like, I have to just love this guy, right? And so I went head on and confronted and talked to this guy of what was happening, and he ended up almost like collapsing in my arms and just crying his eyes out.
Oh,
Uh, and he had basically been on kind of like this just self-destructive bender for the last 7 days.
right.
Some really bad decisions, some alcohol, and just really just kind of like I'm kind of a mess.
Right.
And I guess he had someone that he could release some of that with, and then we're like, okay, like what should we do?
Right.
And we're like, well, there was a retreat happening in 4 days, and so we suggested it to him, and we ended up making an agreement that if you could be completely clean and completely off everything before this retreat starts,
Right.
and there's a room here you can stay in and stuff, and you can be in the retreat.
Wow.
And so we put him in the retreat, and
So he honored it. He got clean in those days.
I mean,
Prior.
even the next day when he came out, he was still, you could tell he was still kind of a
Sure.
mess, but
Sure.
something he had committed to doing it.
Cool.
And he ended up being in the retreat, and then just one of the biggest transformations I've ever seen.
Really?
Because he went from being basically suicidal, self-destructive to and he's still, so the first retreat was over a year and a half ago, and I went out with him and his family probably 4 or 5 months ago.
What?
Yeah.
Really?
Uh,
So wow, I was going to ask if you're still in contact with him. So he went from being shirtless, showing up at the finca, struggling with some things, to you had dinner with his family.
yeah, I mean, he had a shirt, he had his own life, but he was still he was like, I mean, he was in a bad shape.
Wow.
And
Wow. And he seems to be doing well.
yeah.
That's great.
And again, he said I could share it, so it's not like
Totally. Totally.
something that I enjoy doing is talking to people about it, people that are interested. So for people that are interested in maybe doing this at some point, I am happy to schedule that phone call and answer any questions you have about the retreat, about some of the medicines we discussed, anything that is of concern, or anything that anyone would like a better explanation on.
Totally. And I don't know if we talked about this, but food is included throughout the retreat. There's a full kitchen there. It's made, and the water's derived from a well.
Yeah, pretty much everything is, most things are included in the price. There's a few things like massages, a couple that are not, but it's pretty much all inclusive.
Ruger, thank you so much for your time today. As someone who has participated in the 7-day MexiSoul retreat, it's been an honor to have you here. And what you've created has transformed so many lives, and truly you're a bridge between people and cultures, and just keep at it. You're doing great work.
Appreciate it. I really think.
You got it. And all of the links to MexiSoul's website and their social media will be in the show notes below. So be sure to reach out to them if you have any questions. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. We'll see you guys next time.